the Loop, I'm Christian Bryant. If you're like me, going from the weekend to the weekday is like slamming on the brakes. Like I feel whiplashed right now, but hopefully we can ease you into the rest of the week by making sure you know what's happening in the world around you. Here's what we got. US borders are back open after almost 20 long months, and we're getting a firsthand look at what that means for the nation from a border town down south. Then we take a look at how younger generations are fighting for a better future, from climate change to voter outreach. But first, let's start with kids and what they're up to these days. Not to date myself, but back in my day, we didn't have cell phones with all these apps that can expose youngins to whatever. Eventually, I did get a Nokia with the Snake game. Y'all know which game I'm talking about. And later, one of those flip phones. But let me tell you, if I accidentally clicked the internet button on it, I almost had a heart attack since it wasn't included in the phone plan. Not the case these days. Almost every phone is a smartphone, and internet access is a given. But it's not just phones. In a Pew Research study which talked to parents of a child 11 years old or younger, 77% said their child used a tablet, 44% said their child used a computer, another 44% said their kid had a gaming device, and it doesn't stop there. Children these days have a huge digital footprint, from parents posting their pictures on Facebook to Amazon or Google purchase preferences. Companies are getting a lot of opportunities to collect data on kids. The thing is, outdated laws when it comes to privacy make it all too easy to do this. There is COPPA, which stands for Children Online Privacy Protection Act, but it was written in 1998, more than 20 years ago. We've come a long way since then. Basically, the act only applies to sites geared towards children, leaving a big opening for social media sites to argue the rules don't apply to them, since many require you to be at least 13 years or older. A few years ago, YouTube did find itself in some hot water with the Federal Trade Commission. An investigation found that many channels on the platform were child-directed and used certain identifiers to serve targeted ads to kids, which is a big no-no. It was a $170 million lesson. Since then, we've seen a lot of kid-friendly versions of apps pop up, like YouTube Kids, Facebook's Messenger Kids, and others. There was even an Instagram for kids in the works, but the project was put on pause earlier this year. These are attempts from companies to better cover themselves, and also an attempt to show how they are better protecting kids' privacy and what they are exposed to. But there are a lot of layers to this. Luckily, Newsy's technology correspondent Tyler Adkison is here to peel some of those layers back for us.
Teens are prolific social media users, and children are increasingly on social media. And that's creating a unique issue for platforms that depend on collecting user data as part of their business models. Those platforms need to figure out how to get data from their youngest users without jeopardizing privacy or violating federal law. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube all have policies banning children under 13 from having personal accounts, in part because the US's main child privacy law sets specific rules on how and when online services can collect data for users 12 and under.
There's not a lot of privacy law in the United States. There is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which is, if you know it's a kid, or if you should know it's a kid, then there's supposed to be rules around. You're not supposed to be, personalizing advertising based on it. But if it's a general purpose site, or it's like a tween site, or something else, unless they happen to know for a fact that the user is underage, which they would have no reason to do, there already aren't a lot of legal protections in place.
Because many sites can turn a blind eye on screening users, kids are finding their way onto social media even if they're not old enough, meaning their data can be collected at earlier and earlier ages. According to a University of Michigan report, roughly half of parents of kids between 10 and 12 said their kids used social media apps in the first 6 months of 2021. A third of parents of kids between 7 and 9 said the same.
The moment you go online, you're being profiled. Your browser's using cookies to track what you do. If you do log on to a site, then you're making it more likely to be associated with you by name. So if you provide an email address, and then especially if you lie about your age and tell someone that you're over 18 in order to access a site, then your browsing behavior can be associated with that email address, which people use for decades.
Justin Brookman, head of technology policy for Consumer Reports, told Newsy that until the US adopts new privacy laws, most of the guardrails for protecting kids' data will depend on how companies self-regulate, and whether they're using proactive detection methods to find and remove users who would be covered by the child privacy law known as COPPA. Facebook's head of global safety, Antigone Davis, told Congress it removed more than 600,000 Instagram accounts of users below 13 between June and August of 2021. Tyler Adkison, Newsy.
Newsy's Tyler Adkison is always here to help us digest the world of tech, and as usual, there's a lot to unpack. I did have one other question, so I phoned the expert. Tyler, I mentioned how COPPA is outdated, and clearly you showed there are ways for companies to get their hands on so much of the kids' information. Are there any efforts trying to update the laws when it comes to better protecting children's data?
You know, there's been newfound calls to update COPPA, especially after the revelations from the Facebook leaks, which showed exactly how much the company knew about whether its products were harmful for kids and teenagers. In fact, Senators Richard Blumenthal and Ed Markey, the latter of whom actually served as one of the original House drafters of the COPPA bill, have called for the passage of a new bill that would update it to include, among other things, raising the age limit for children who can't have their data collected from the current benchmark of 12 to 15. Markey and Representative Bill Cassidy are also proposing a separate update that would create an online eraser button so that social media companies would have to allow users to eliminate personal information about a kid or a teen if they are asked to do so. Representative Kathy Castor of Florida has her own bill out that would expand the current law to make it so that any teenager under 18 would have to give their consent to these social media companies before they get their data collected. Earlier in the show, you also mentioned that YouTube was hit with a fine from the Federal Trade Commission for the ways that it served ads to kids, and there does seem to be a bit more of a regulatory appetite from these agencies as well, even if the fines are a bit small for some of these huge companies. For instance, the Federal Trade Commission fined TikTok $5.7 million for what they say are infractions around the collection of personal information on users 13 and under. But I think one thing that is important to point out here is that in a lot of senses, the guardrails that are in place to prevent kids from getting on these platforms in the first place don't always work, which means inevitably kids can have their data collected, sold, and shared much like adults do. You know, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok say that they don't allow users younger than 13 on their platform, but we know there's ways to easily bypass the sign-up process, and in some cases that means their data is being treated in the same ways as adults. So at the end of the day, really what comes into place here is that for as much as it is important to be able to protect the data of kids on there, there also needs to be better guardrails in place to make sure that they're not even getting on the platforms in the first place, if that's the rules that these social media companies are creating.
You ever scroll through social media and see a trend that's kind of a head scratcher? Well, luckily, we're plugged in enough, maybe too much, so we can let you know what you're missing. After the break, we're unpacking what's trending on social media. Welcome back, folks. Social media is good for some LOLs every once in a while, but it can also help us more easily tap into developing news. So let's dive in. At least 8 people died at Travis Scott's Astroworld Music Festival in Houston on Friday. The youngest was 14 and the oldest was 27. Many others were seriously injured. A lot of people are asking, how could this happen? And sadly, there are a lot of past incidents that can help us understand how exactly concert crowds can become deadly. In this kind of situation, people aren't just getting hurt by being trampled. There's also the risk of not getting enough oxygen when so many people are crammed so tightly together.
We transported 17 patients to the hospitals. 11 of those that were transported were in cardiac arrest.
The festival had about 50,000 people in the crowd, and as the chaos unfolded, concert goers say many people around them were passing out and screaming for help. At some point, Scott paused the concert to point out people in the crowd who needed help.
We need somebody to help him. Somebody pass out right here. Somebody pass out right here. Hold on, don't touch him, don't touch him.
Of course, we don't know what Scott could hear or see throughout the show, but the concert continued for nearly 40 minutes after city officials declared it a mass casualty event. Since the festival wrapped Friday night, several lawsuits have been filed, including ones against Travis Scott, Drake, who also performed at Astroworld, the venue, and the festival's host, Live Nation. The suits claim that the rappers incited the crowd and that Live Nation failed to provide proper security and medical services. Scott has been charged with inciting crowds in the past, released, once in 2015 at Lollapalooza and again in 2017 after a concert in Arkansas. He said in a tweet over the weekend that he was absolutely devastated by what happened, and he has since refunded tickets to all attendees. The reviews for Marvel's Eternals are all over the place. The range is like from Earth to Asgard, but the film is getting praise from GLAAD for how it handles LGBTQ representation. Brian Tyree Henry plays Phastos, an eternal being who's like a cosmic engineering savant. Phastos is also the MCU's first openly gay superhero. In the movie, we see him with a husband and a son. Megan Townsend, GLAAD's director of entertainment research and analysis, gave Marvel some props in a guest column by saying, "The couple's relationship is a key aspect of Phastos' story and helps viewers to find a relatable aspect of Phastos' life. And they even get to share a moment that is still so rarely seen between queer couples in mainstream films, a kiss." Does that count as a spoiler alert? If so, don't at me. This is major considering how rare it is to see LGBTQ characters on the big screen for a significant amount of time. GLAAD's 2019 Studio Responsibility Index study found that 22 of the 118 theatrically released films from 8 major studios included LGBTQ characters. Marvel's The Eternals made more than $70 million at the box office during its opening weekend, which is the 4th highest grossing weekend since the pandemic started. Something else that's being widely talked about online today, the busiest Borderland crossing in the world reopening after being partially closed for nearly 20 months. National correspondent Ben Shamiso took a trip to Texas to report on the latest. Ben, what was it like in El Paso and next door in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico?
Hi Christian, absolute joy and excitement today on both sides of the border. Behind me is one of El Paso's 3 international bridges where thousands of Mexican tourists have been coming today by foot and by car. We just talked to a few of them and they're telling us they're very delighted to be here after 20 months to do some shopping ahead of the holidays, but also most importantly to reunite with family members.
Bueno, que yo ya puedo ir a visitar a mi hija. Mi hija está acá, mi familia, mis primas, muchas personas de mi familia viven acá en El Paso, en Las Cruces, y pues ya podemos ir a visitarlas. Bien, ya tenía pues, como 2 años que no veníamos, y ahora es el primer día. Pensamos que iba a estar muy lleno, pero no. Estaba muy bien la línea y está muy rápido.
As you just heard, surprisingly, there wasn't as big a line as expected. These people we talked to telling us it only took them 5 minutes, but things are gonna ebb and flow throughout the day, but so far, things are running smoothly here at the border. Before the pandemic, before the border closed, some 22,000 people from northern Mexico were coming every day to shop in El Paso, but when that foot traffic plunged, as many as 45 businesses had to close. Now, businesses that have survived are going out of their way to welcome back Mexican shoppers.
We're grateful for our customers from El Paso, but our main customers are from across the border. We're planning on giving donuts, coffee, and sandwiches just to make them feel welcome, and we're planning on going to meet them like close to the border with a sign letting them know how important they are to us.
Not all shop owners here in El Paso are that optimistic. Some are telling us they don't believe their sales are gonna pick up to pre-pandemic level because even though Mexican tourists are coming back, the way COVID-19 has hurt the Mexican economy and Mexican workers means perhaps they're gonna be spending less money.
When you're back, we're talking legislation, from how the passage of the infrastructure bill will impact rural communities to one law that benefits drivers.
What if the news was different and covered more than one side of the story?
Justice wasn't served.
So you can make up your own mind.
I love her so much.
Introducing the new point of view. Yours. Newsy. Watch free 24-hour news.
Welcome back, folks. The $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill passed after months of negotiations. It includes improvements for roads, bridges, and broadband, among other things. It can have a huge impact on the farming community, providing better roads to help them transport food to consumers and high-speed internet for the software used on some of their tractors. National correspondent Chris Conti shows us how this bill will benefit rural areas across the country.
it's very peaceful.
It would be easy out here on these empty Oklahoma roads to assume it is always this quiet. But for as peaceful as the countryside is,
so that's how they know it's time to eat.
Charlie Koblenz knows just how loud life on the farm can get. The 42-year-old third-generation cattle farmer has called Mays County, Oklahoma home for his entire life. His family farms thousands of acres of land here and has hundreds of heads of cattle.
Food production is one of the most noble things that you can do in the world, is to produce food for others.
But like the hills that define the landscape, 2021 has had its share of ups and downs.
The prices of all of our inputs, the prices have gone insane. Everything is literally over twice of what it was last year at this time.
It's part of the reason why Charlie and other farmers across the country have been keeping a close eye on Washington.
Right here in this country.
Parts of the infrastructure bill passed last week could make a big difference out here, from improving the roads which help get food to consumers to expanding high-speed broadband, something Charlie now needs just to run the software on his tractors and trucks.
There's internet really within 2 miles of me right now. It's almost here.
Out here, surrounded by land, though, you might be surprised to learn that some of these farmers' biggest concerns when it comes to the infrastructure bill have to do with water. The nearby port of Catoosa moves 400 tons of cargo each hour. Farmers rely heavily on it to export everything they produce. Problem is, this part of the Arkansas River the port uses has been in desperate need of dredging for decades.
They've been talking about this for years now, and it's not getting taken care of.
With silt levels incredibly high on the river, it means barges have to be lighter in order to float through. That means more ships carrying fewer goods and less money for Charlie Koblenz.
If we're not efficient, we're going broke. We can barely make a living as it is. We have to take care of everything we're provided.
The infrastructure bill has $17 billion allocated to improve waterways, some of which could flow directly into the port of Catoosa for maintenance needs.
I think it's certainly a huge percent of the investment for a long time now has been to the urban areas.
Rod Mosel is with the Oklahoma Farm Bureau. He's hopeful that the $550 billion tagged for road improvement could directly impact small towns like this.
When they're not working, it's a huge issue on getting our crops to market and making America work.
The bill may have passed, but farmers like Charlie Koblenz,
we'll feed things back over this way,
are now the ones who will wait and see how long it takes for that money to reach their communities.
I have to be as efficient as I possibly can to make a living. And I have no faith in Washington, D.C. being efficient with our tax dollars.
Like the cows he spends his life caring for, Charlie just wants to see things moving in the right direction. In Choteau, Oklahoma, I'm Chris Conti.
After the break, we're hopping back over to Glasgow to see what's going on at COP26.
Why do we have bureaus in Missoula, Nashville, and Tulsa? Because we want to tell the whole story.
When you look at it from your child's perspective, they don't see the world the way we do anymore.
And elevate voices from all over the country.
There are times when you're just trying to keep your head above the water.
We believe that people are at the heart of a good news story.
So you've lived in this area all your life?
All my life.
We're in the midst of an amazing revolution. It's probably going to be the biggest challenge of all.
It's through their eyes that we gain perspective and better understand how news impacts them.
Technology is changing, but you can't kill love.
It's about the whole community stepping up to help.
And how it affects you. Newsy. Watch free 24/7.
Welcome back, gang. COP26, the UN's climate change summit in Glasgow, Scotland, is entering its second week. While there have been agreements on coal plants and deforestation, there hasn't been a widespread agreement to majorly reduce emissions or take other steps to act quickly to avoid the worst effects of climate change. The UN has asked countries to self-report their greenhouse gas emissions, but not every country has participated. Our friends at the Washington Post found through original data reporting that these numbers are significantly undercounted, and there's a huge gap in unclaimed emissions.
When world leaders and activists talk about combating climate change,
mitigating CO2 emissions,
carbon-free economy,
carbon neutrality, net zero,
their main goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Those gases from cars, oil refineries, cows, etc., all trap heat and lead to warming temperatures, causing more devastating natural disasters and drought, and melting glaciers leading to sea level rise. According to the August 2021 UN climate report, the average global temperature has already been predicted to soon reach an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, only stopping there if countries make immediate, large-scale reductions. But do we have a clear picture of the world's emissions?
The UN has asked countries across the globe to report greenhouse emissions within their countries to the UN, and they put that in a centralized database. We developed a model which would present 2019 numbers for countries that didn't report data from that year. And at that point, we were able to tally this up and come up with a global number.
What we found is that there is a pretty significant gap between the two.
The Post found that total global emissions are significantly undercounted, and that there is a 16 to 23% gap in unclaimed emissions from 2019. Figuring out why the numbers are off might come down to a basic question. How are countries measuring their emissions?
The most simple equation that many countries use is to take an activity like, how many cows are there on pastures in your country? That would be your activity data, and then multiply it by what's called an emissions factor. So per cow, we think that this much methane is belched into the air in a year. And then that multiplication more or less is your emission number. Obviously, that is a huge oversimplification of what is actually going on. Cows are not all the same size. They do not all emit the same amount of methane. Plus, that's assuming you have the number of cows correct to begin with. So this is the process by which a lot of errors inevitably get introduced.
The alternative to using the UN's ground-up method is the top-down model, which uses satellite data.
Scientists can now take satellite measurements of emissions over a territory of at least a large country, or atmospheric measurements, or both, and run them through a computer simulation and attribute where they came from.
One of the drawbacks of that method is that it doesn't capture every country, every small nation across the globe. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we faced in trying to find a global number.
Currently, countries divide their land into managed or unmanaged areas.
Land gets divided in the UN system into forest, grassland, cropland, settlements. Those are cities. A lot of countries claim that the managed area is sucking a lot of carbon out of the air rather than emitting it, and so that can then be applied to lower the total emissions.
But not all countries use the same approach.
The US, for instance, almost the entire country is considered managed land. They can take any reductions from the land and apply it into their net emissions. But Australia does it differently. Canada does it differently. So there isn't an equal playing field for all these countries.
And it's not a simple equation. Some land areas, like rainforests, are carbon sinks.
The reason land is so tough is that A, it's full of scientific uncertainty. So what is actually happening with how forests, for instance, pull carbon in, but then give it up again if they, face drought, or if they're chopped down, or if they burn.
Another issue is that the numbers are self-reported, with little accountability.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
World leaders have repeatedly committed to lowering emissions, in Kyoto in 1997 and in Paris in 2015.
Under that agreement, that was the first time the world got organized to do something about climate change, and really they all are driven by the will and the participation of the countries. If you don't do this, there's no punishment except for sort of political being unpopular, being criticized. There's nothing other than that.
We're already in a crucial moment where greenhouse gas emissions need to be drastically reduced.
If we are wrongly calculating the emissions today, our policies that we should be adhering to for the next 50 years are going to be based on these incorrect numbers. So 50 years from now, we are going to be in a much worse place than our models or predictions are foreseen.
Many thanks to the folks at the Washington Post for that reporting. With so much news every day, and with it feeling like there's so much at stake in the short term, it can be easy to forget how much our actions have long-term consequences. Whether it's an issue like voting and democracy or the environment and climate change, young people are most likely to feel the brunt of the long-term effects. Over the weekend, tens of thousands of protesters, many of whom were younger people, hit the streets in Glasgow to urge world leaders to do more. Newsy has been covering the effects of climate change in our series, Our New Reality, A Changing Planet. As a part of that series, Chris Jones has more on how young people are pushing for climate action.
Whilst delegates negotiate, young people congregate. One Young World, a community of more than 12,000 young leaders, has rented this space on the River Clyde. It provides a forum for people like Nasha from Argentina to give her view and hear others from around the globe. As a UNESCO Global Youth Delegate for the Paris Agreement in 2015, she knows all too well about the message young people can send and the influence they can wield.
I believe that this new generation of people are really going to drive the transition, right? And we have been more young people than ever at COPs. My first COP was COP21. After that, I also had the opportunity to be a One Young World ambassador at the Hague Summit, where I see the power of youth. And right now, I see it here again. And actually, I believe that the young people are those who inspire us to change. Who inspires you the most? Like the big leaders coming like in the Glasgow and saying again and again the same speeches, or the young people that walk in the streets and actually teaching their parents and doing a lot for climate?
And those are sentiments being echoed by even the highest profile activists.
Inside COP, there are just politicians and people in power pretending to take our future seriously, pretending to take the present seriously of the people who are being affected already today by the climate crisis. Change is not going to come from inside there. That is not leadership. This is leadership. This is what leadership looks like.
And this is what she's inspired. A protest by Fridays for Future, a movement that began when then 15-year-old Greta Thunberg went on strike from school to object against the lack of action on the climate crisis. About 10,000 people have joined this march through Glasgow. They say the promises made at COP26 just aren't enough.
I feel like it's a lot of a show.
A lot of words and maybe not actually meaningful change.
There's no other planets that we can survive on, so we need to protect the one we can survive on.
But one member of the UK Youth Climate Coalition says young people can make a difference at this summit alongside world leaders. Serena, aged 23, has been at every COP since she was 18, calling in particular for climate justice. She says there have been some changes within the walls of the conference that point towards progress.
For the last COP, COP25, there wasn't really that much collaboration with organising the key youth events within the COP25 programme. But then this year, the mic has kind of been passed on to us as the young people to actually organise these events and take a lead in actually having a say in how these are organised. So that's really nice to see.
There is hope then that these calls for action will be heeded and acted upon. Yet time is running out. If future generations are to be protected, their demands will need to be heard sooner rather than later. Chris Jones for Newsy in Glasgow.
Climate change isn't the only issue where young people are mobilizing. More young voters are recognizing the power they have at the ballot box. Half of young Americans voted in the 2020 presidential election, one of the biggest turnouts from young voters in recent history. But in last week's big election for governor in Virginia, exit polls suggested the electorate skewed older than in last year's presidential election. And that issue can crop up in off-year elections in other states too. National correspondent Alexa Liacco spoke with young voters in Minnesota who are hoping to make sure young voters keep showing up at the polls.
I vote for my family. I vote for those who can't vote. I vote for my future.
The reasons are many, but the goal is the same.
To really enact change that can impact many, many lives for years and years to come.
A different future. something these young voters know they can build.
I want to be a part of that solution.
In last year's election, college students Raina Meyer and Hafsa Ahmed spent hundreds of hours mobilizing their community to vote.
I was able to interact one-on-one with voters in my community.
I door knocked, I phone banked, I text banked.
Efforts like theirs across the country worked. Half of Americans ages 18 to 29 voted in the presidential election. It's one of the highest participation rates since the voting age was lowered to 18 in 1970.
A lot of people, when they think of politics, they think, oh, it's too partisan, we're not going to get involved. And I think it's important to remember that the future that we are looking towards is one that affects all of us, no matter what we believe, no matter what our political standing is. A lot of young people do understand that.
So young people spoke up for what mattered most.
For juvenile justice, it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Brandon Brooks worked with Raina, Hafsa, and many young voters through the Minnesota Alliance with Youth to help make their voices heard.
If we just stopped and actually gave the platform to young people, that's where the work is, that's where the power is.
Now, 1 year after an empowering moment for young voters, the question is, will the young keep fighting for change?
We grew up during the Great Recession, where we saw our parents get laid off. We saw economic crashes. We've seen climate disasters. And I think that has given us an unparalleled sense of civic duty.
Both Hafsa and Raina took that sense of duty to the highest level they could. They joined the Minnesota Youth Council.
We were able to help influence legislation, talk with our legislators, and really make a difference.
Minnesota is the only state in the country that passed a law to create a council of young people to work directly with legislators. And for the first time this year, that student council got state funding.
This past year, it has been kind of a wake-up call for our country in terms of where our democracy stands. But what really gives me hope is my fellow young people.
That's why these students are glad their state is funding this platform for young voices.
I do think that now more than ever, we are seeing a movement of people and a movement of young people ready and willing to make the sacrifices and do the work to enact a future that we're looking for.
And they know that policy change starts with one simple action at the ballot box.
I vote for myself.
I vote for my community.
And I vote for the future.
I'm Alexa Liaco reporting.
Many thanks to Alexa for that reporting. When you're back, we're turning our attention to the fight against COVID-19 and how some people are using virtual reality to escape during this difficult time. Welcome back to ITL, folks. The Biden administration is ramping up efforts to get a new age group vaccinated against COVID-19. The Pfizer vaccine was approved for kids ages 5 to 11 last week. Now, the White House is encouraging schools to share fact sheets and host educational forums for parents on the shots. The thing is, there's this other hurdle parents might have to deal with. Research shows about 40% of children under the age of 12 have a fear of needles. In some cases, that alone can make a trip to the pharmacy or doctor's office a lot more stressful. But virtual reality is letting some kids escape from that fear and anxiety. National correspondent Usher Qureshi shows us how putting on a pair of goggles can transport kids to somewhere else completely and take their minds off what's happening in the real world.
Most kids dread getting a shot at the doctor's office.
I just don't like them, they hurt.
For 8-year-old Molly Chandler, however, the fear of needles is actually debilitating.
Anytime she had to get vaccinations, we struggled. Quick, 3-second prick, but it took her like 30 minutes to recover from it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is intense.
But scientists are testing out a new piece of virtual reality technology that could help.
These particular set of goggles have a program in them that is specifically designed to have the experience match up with a child getting a shot, a poke, an injection.
Don't underwater no more.
Using the VR goggles, 7-year-old Michi Jeans, who is battling leukemia, is transported to a virtual sea adventure.
This is when you'll feel a tiny pinch.
It allows his nurses to access his needle port while distracting him from any pain or anxiety.
It's nice because he can hear too, so I'm telling him what I'm doing, but he's focusing more on the screen and the VR goggles.
Designed by Australian physicians, Smiley Scope synchronizes real-world medical procedures with the virtual experience. The system can be used during vaccinations, IV placements, and even blood draws.
So for example, when you're having the alcohol wipe on your skin, within the VR timing, you're having little fish like swim across you.
Those visual distractions can trick the mind into separating the pain and anxiety of negative stimuli and replacing it with something more positive.
Basically, it helps the child's brain reformulate the sensory experience so that the shot is less stressful and scary.
When Molly was diagnosed with a rare bone cancer, that meant facing even more needles for chemotherapy.
So my first thought was, how is this girl who has major needle anxiety going to go through chemo and get poked every week?
Her needle anxiety got so bad that they sometimes had to turn around without treatment. But that all changed once she put on a pair of Smiley Scope goggles.
Whenever I'm in there, I can't even feel when I get poked. And I like how they narrate.
Welcome aboard.
See the fish, but be careful, they might nibble a little. That's, I think, what they mean by when you get poked.
She was totally immersed in what was happening with the VR goggles. And she's like, okay, you can get started. And they're like, we're done. She didn't have needle anxiety. She wasn't anxious about going to chemo after that.
Next week, Molly's scheduled to get her first COVID vaccine dose.
Are you scared about the needle at all?
Yes, a lot.
And while she's apprehensive, she knows she can get through it.
Well done.
I'm Usher Qureshi reporting.
Amazing what you can do with technology. I am, however, wondering if there's an age limit to using those. I wouldn't mind escaping reality for my flu shot, low-key. In this next story, we are keeping with the medical talk and taking a trip down to a new research center in Colorado. Marijuana has been legal in the state since 2012, but there is still a lot we don't know about the different ways we can use the drug medically. See, cannabinoids are found in the plant, and there are a lot of different kinds, like CBD or THC, but there's some serious research lacking when it comes to understanding the full scope of the benefits. National correspondent Elizabeth Ruiz shows us how this lab hopes to change that.
Madeline Roach is a third-year PhD candidate. She works in the newly opened Panacea Life Sciences Cannabinoid Research Center. Ta-da! It's a state-of-the-art lab at Colorado State University that is expected to pave the way for cannabinoid science.
On the instruments, they have detectors.
The director of the lab is Melissa Reynolds.
The center is really also meant as a collaborative space to bring together research from across campus, from across disciplines, to really look at how can cannabinoids be used to really better society?
Cannabinoids are found in the cannabis plant, and there are many different types like CBD, CBG, and THC. They interact with receptors in our body that regulate processes like appetite, pain sensation, mood, and memory. THC is the cannabinoid that makes a person high. That's not being studied at this research center, but CBD has been known to help with seizures, anxiety, pain relief, and more. What's lacking is scientific data and analysis to know the full extent of the potential medical benefits. This lab will likely change that.
We need to be able to identify the cannabinoids and be able to measure them. How much do we have in a certain cannabinoid to have a certain effect on epilepsy or weight loss or anxiety? And so being able to make those measurements is really key to being able to understand what cannabinoids can be used for what types of applications.
Melissa says this reliable data could change the landscape of treatment for certain conditions like alcohol addiction, irritable bowel syndrome, or even insomnia.
In terms of whether these uses are backed by clinical evidence, there is some for some uses and there is much less for others.
Daniele Piomelli is the director of the Center for the Study of Cannabis at the University of California, Irvine. He says cannabis data has been limited so far due to legal hurdles.
There has been a steady growth of research on cannabinoids over the last several decades, actually. A lot of the research was thwarted by the fact that cannabinoids are Schedule 1. So it's very hard to do research on cannabinoids.
Schedule 1 substances, which include heroin, MDMA, cannabis, and others, are recognized by the federal government as drugs with a high potential for abuse. Daniele says he'd like to see the legal regulations change so cannabinoids can be properly studied and regulated.
We are stuck in a situation where we have this sort of tantalizing evidence, substantial even evidence, that the THC in cannabis may be useful to treat pain, but we don't have the type of evidence to be able to tell our physicians, to tell our patients, this is the doses that will work, and this is what you can expect, and this is how you need to prescribe.
The instrumentation in the lab permits researchers to measure at lower levels than other centers, which provides them the opportunity to be more nimble as regulations change. Melissa says it's also a place where students like Madeline can see the impact of their research.
The center has, and this is very unique for an academic institution, a mid-scale manufacturing separating instrumentation called a NovaSep that allows us to be able to do this at fairly large scale, so we can actually use our methods that students develop in the center and then scale that up to be good enough that we could use for various types of additional studies that we want to do.
Not only could they have a significant impact in the medical field, but Melissa says they are training the next generation of scientists that are going to impact the world.
These will do her.
I'm Elizabeth Ruiz reporting.
We're about to head into another break, but before you drown out the commercials and continue scrolling on your phone, give me a shout on social media using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. Or did I already lose you? And now it's time to close the loop on our top stories. If you're just now joining us, here's what you missed. In a Pew Research study which talked to parents of a child 11 years old or younger, 77% said their child used a tablet, 44% said their child used a computer, another 44% said their kid had a gaming device, and it doesn't stop there. Children these days have a huge digital footprint, from parents posting their pictures on Facebook to Amazon or Google purchase preferences. Companies are getting a lot of opportunities to collect data on kids.
The moment you go online, you're being profiled. Your browser's using cookies to track what you do. If you do log on to a site, then you're making it more likely to be associated with you by name. So if you provide an email address, and then especially if you lie about your age and tell someone that you're over 18 in order to access a site, then your browsing behavior can be associated with that email address, which people use for decades.
The thing is, outdated laws when it comes to privacy make it all too easy to do this. There is COPPA, which stands for Children Online Privacy Protection Act, but it was written in 1998, more than 20 years ago. We've come a long way since then. Basically, the act only applies to sites geared towards children, leaving a big opening for social media sites to argue the rules don't apply to them, since many require you to be at least 13 years or older. And then we showed you how young people are taking their future into their own hands and pushing for global action on climate change.
I believe that this new generation of people are really going to drive the transition, right? And we have been more young people than ever at COPs. My first COP was COP21. After that, I also had the opportunity to be a One Young World ambassador at the Hague Summit, where I see the power of youth. And right now, I see it here again. And actually, I believe that the young people are those who inspire us to change.
And those are sentiments being echoed by even the highest profile activists.
Inside COP, there are just politicians and people in power pretending to take our future seriously, pretending to take the present seriously of the people who are being affected already today by the climate crisis. Change is not going to come from inside there. That is not leadership. This is leadership. This is what leadership looks like.
About 10,000 people have joined this march through Glasgow. They say the promises made at COP26 just aren't enough.
That's it for this episode of In the Loop. Thank you to all of you for joining us. We hope to see you again soon. We've got some great reporting coming your way right here on Newsy.